Mchunu joins us now in studio to tackle this. A very good evening to you, Manqoba. Thank you so much for joining us. A very heartbreaking story, I must say. Who should be held accountable for this?
Well, certainly it's a heartbreaking story, and it's one that really touched me as well doing it. And I think with the arbitration hearings going on at this current moment, I think the focus is now on those officials that really made these decisions, the ones that are behind the transfers of these patients that are being asked very difficult questions about why they went ahead with these transfers despite the several warnings that they shouldn't go ahead. So really the focus is on trying to find answers from them why really they did this. So I think the people who would have to answer for this obviously will be the former health MEC Qedani Mahlangu, as well as Dr. Manamela, who we saw on the stand last week, also being grilled there on a role in those particular transfers, as well as the HOD, Dr. Panisile Lubane, who we're expecting to possibly take the stand if at all he loses his court case that is currently before the court. We know that a ruling is expected today. So they are the main key players who have been identified by the Health Ombudsman's report as being all over the project. In fact, what the Health Ombudsman said in his report is that their fingerprints were peppered throughout this whole project. So they are the real people that can actually explain, including the project leaders and those who were involved, the team of experts that were involved in these transfers, could also give answers as to this. But with regards to the issue of this family and why their loved one was buried, I think the answers also lie with the Department of Health in terms of that. We did speak to the Department of Health, and they did indicate that they cannot comment on this issue as the arbitration hearings are going on, referring us to the Premier's office.
Now, Unompilo Nkosi, the sister of one of the Esidimeni survivors, wants to be financially compensated for this financial and emotional stress and trauma that her family endured. Surely all the other families should be compensated for this, isn't it?
In fact, yes. That's what Justice Moseneke is really tasked to do at this point. His job is really to assess the individual cases of these families, and then based on those, try to come up with a figure that they can compensate the families with. And he did say at the beginning of this process that he really has a tough time because, how do you put value, or how do you put money to a person's life? How do you put that sort of value to a person, especially somebody who was mentally ill and somebody who was not productive or working per se, or a breadwinner for their family? So that's something that he'll have to juggle with in the coming days to say, really, how does he decide how to compensate each and every family? Does each and every family get the same amount? Do those who have members of their families that survived, maybe are they compensated little than others who lost their family members? So those are some of the questions that he'll be dealing with in days to come. We saw an expert being called last week who tried to sort of determine the way in which he can maybe look at how to value the different kind of claims that come before him. But of course, they'll have to take each and every family's circumstances into coming up with this sort of compensation for these families. And certainly, each and every family should be compensated. As the Gauteng government has already pointed out, that they do take responsibility and that they do want to make amends for what happened in the Life Esidimeni tragedy. So a really tough time for the justice, because he's the one that has to finally come out with the amount or the award, as it's referred to in this particular manner. But he did indicate that, it's something that you'll have to sit and look down at circumstances. We heard during the proceedings as well, families being asked, for example, the traveling cost when you had to go and see your loved one, the traveling cost of the funeral, the cost of the funeral itself. So some of the questions that he was asking were sort of trying to get to, look at the figures that were spent by the families in trying to deal with this situation.
And it also shows a lack of compassion on the part of the government on a broader scale. For instance, Dr. Manqoba Manamela even said some of the patients were checked in at a child facility because they were considered as children.
That's what families say. They say that, the government in this case really didn't care for their family members, or even for them, for what, the families, before that they were always against this move. So the families are saying that the government in this matter didn't listen to their voices, it simply ignored them, so they didn't care at all about this. And speaking of that issue of Takalani being a childcare center, we heard the testimony of Dr. Manamela, who said that, they considered some of these patients as children. So being sent to a children's home was not anything out of the odd, because in terms of their mental capacity, some of them are viewed as children. So, but the question was raised then to say that, a rape happened at Takalani where one of the patients raped another one. So what do you say to that? Are they still being viewed as children? So she had a tough time also answering to that.
Who are we expecting to see testify?
Well, this week we're expecting the families of the surviving victims to continue giving their testimony. We know that they've already concluded, the families who lost their loved ones, the over 56 families, I believe, that appeared at the arbitration hearing. So now we're left with the families that now have surviving patients that are still alive and that have been moved from the NGOs back into the care of the government and suitable facilities as per the recommendation of the Health Ombudsman. So also they are telling about the tales of how they found their loved ones when they visited them at NGOs and the state in which they're currently in. We heard that, for some other families, they still shock and horror, because if you remember to the testimony that was presented on Friday, where Mr. Joseph Ngwenya was describing how his son was chained at a hospital bed after being moved from an NGO. So there's still some of those horror stories still coming through after these patients have been moved. So we're yet to hear what the other families are going to say. But I'll say, Simpure, the most expected testimony this week will be that of the former or the suspended HOD, Dr. Panisi Lobani, who is, as I said before, among the key players in this Esidimeni tragic transfers of patients. And certainly his answers or his questions, they'll put tough questions to him about his role in that. We know that he said that he doesn't want to testify because he fears that he might be incriminated because all of them with Dr. Manamela are still due to face disciplinary hearings next month. So his testimony will be crucial this week, if at all it goes through. That, of course, dependent on that court case and the ruling that will be given by the High Court tomorrow. And
any word on Qedani Mahlangu?
Well, we know that Qedani is expected to come on the 22nd of January. Okay. She's indicated through her lawyers that she is willing to come, she's willing to answer, and Rubbish Media claims that she's trying to run away. So we are eagerly awaiting to hear from the former MEC when she comes on the 22nd of January.
All right, Manqoba, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure chatting to you this evening. That is our reporter, Manqoba Mchunu, who's been working rather tirelessly on the Esidimeni arbitration hearings over the past couple of weeks or so. All right, Primetime News takes a short break now, and after the break, Simon will have your sports news.